Hi there, and thanks for tuning in to this outstanding history video. So the thing that I want to talk about this morning is some techniques for really critically thinking about Hitler's economic policy. Okay, so the standard narrative that gets trotted out in history lessons is that ultimately Hitler, very bad man, but he got that country back on his feet again, didn't he? Well, no, not really. This is a very contested and ultimately very challengeable point of view. The actual material economic benefits that German people felt as a result of Hitler's economic policy are very mixed indeed. This is for a number of reasons. Reason one, Hitler wasn't an economist, didn't understand economics, and the only experienced economist he has in his team, Hjalmar Schacht, he deeply distrusts. Hitler, an anti-intellectual, isn't able to engage with some of the principal economic ideas of the day. Some people look at Nazism, Hitler's economic policy, and say, well, this is Keynesianism, it's the state in action. But therein is a misunderstanding. It's not Keynesianism because the central part of demand-side economics is that if during an economic downturn the individual shopper and spender and businesses are unable to reflate the economy, then the state must. And the state is the kind of like the last player in the economy that can do anything. This means that the state must spend. When Hitler brought about his Autobahn building policies, which in fact weren't his at all and were Schleicher's who preceded him, Schleicher's cabinet was more focused on Keynesian ideas. Hitler misses out a very crucial part of the policy. It works like this. The idea is to have some practical, useful infrastructure like a nice autobahn to drive cars down, or in Hitler's view, tanks, because the autobahns were going to be part of a military infrastructure. And as much as they were going to be part of anything else, Hitler wanted to asked if they could be enclosed. They could build a roof over the motorways so that enemy aircraft couldn't spot them. And engineers said that this is completely impractical. What the other part of the policy is, that other than having some nice infrastructure, is to properly pay the workers so that then they can immediately spend their wages in shops and other services and start to reflate the economy. And it's the reflation part of that of the policy that's most important. The likes of Schacht were very nervous about reflation, worrying that, as they did, that Germany might be vulnerable to hyperinflation again. Hitler isn't really thinking on this level. And he's looking at things on a racial level. So very often these economic policies are actually racial policies, not economic ones. Why? Because Hitler, firstly, he doesn't reflate the economy by paying the workers on the autobahns a living wage. The workers are very often supported by their own families, or they are workers who are completely unsuited to that kind of manual labour, and so don't do a particularly efficient job. Along with the workers, the sort of urban workers who are sent to work on farms and that kind of thing, they're very often just seen as more of a nuisance by the agricultural and farming class than anything else. But the refusal to properly pay the workers on the autobahns led to economic hardship and simply a continuation of straitened economic circumstances. They had no ability to spend surplus wages in shops. That really kind of misses the point. But Hitler thought that the point of the autobahns was to teach the lazy work shy Germans, as he saw it, the value of a hard day's work, and this would toughen them up and ultimately get them ready for the conflicts ahead. Hitler himself didn't mind the fact. He obviously didn't experience privation. He had a very comfortable life at the Berghof. but he didn't mind the fact that other Germans might experience, relative discomfort, because he thought, well, the Germans need to be toughened up. Part of the reason why we lost the last war is because this lot are a bit too weak. Okay, so moving on, the next part of Hitler's economic policy that doesn't make sense is rearmament. By 1936, Schacht is dismissed over the subject of rearmament as he pleads with Hitler to slow down state spending. He's going to overheat the economy. Hitler doesn't really understand these sorts of things. Hitler's actual economic policy, put simply, is one of plunder. If you can build a big army and conquer other countries and take their surplus wealth, then you manage to resolve the economic problems that your country has. It's quite simple, really. And as an economic policy goes, it's a fairly straightforward one, but it doesn't mark Hitler out as an economic genius at all, more just a violent warmonger. As the economy picks up due to rearmament in the second half of the 1930s, German workers do have more disposable income. And what do they choose to do with it? Well, a great many choose to buy imports. There are things that Germany doesn't produce, and such as luxury items such as chocolate and cigarettes and nice things to buy, and they buy imports. And also they spend a lot of money in Jewish shops, the ones that still survive during the ongoing Aryanization campaigns. There's an understanding, even in the most anti-Semitic of German households, that the Jews sell nice things. Their shops are really good. So this undermines Hitler's other racial policies, which is interesting because we can see that Hitler's kind of mishmash of ideas are often contradictory and incoherent and undermine one another. But they when buying products from abroad, this creates a net outflow of wealth from the country, which is exactly what you don't want if you're getting ready for war. So rearmament and stockpiling wealth for war are contradictory economic goals. Hitler, again, doesn't understand this because he's not an economist. And he's not willing to listen to economists either. His anti-intellectualism leads him to believe that simple, common-sense solutions can cut through bureaucratic chatter and everything will be fine. Finally, it's for these reasons that Hitler institutes an autarkic policy. At the end of the 1930s, 1937 onwards, he introduces autarky, which is this plan within a kind of at what was then already a fairly globalized world economy for commodities. Its attempt at self-sufficiency, which was hopelessly and wildly unrealistic. But as we know, this policy really is a prelude to the real economic policies of Lebensraum. And you can see, if you've read Black Earth by Timothy Snyder, which is a great read, the first chapter talks about living space and the idea that living space was not just a physical expression, but also it was an idea that German people needed space to have a certain standard of living, and therefore the asset stripping of the East, which was eventually, with the hunger plan, going to result in an anticipated 30 million deaths through starvation in the Soviet Union, would be how Germany would manage to feed her armies and keep her population in the standard of living to which they become accustomed. And there is, in addition to this, during the war, an immense boost to German standards of living when occupied countries like France, Belgium and the Netherlands experience a 50% decline in the calories available to their populations. And so Germany's war, in a very real sense, is a war of plunder. Anyway, thanks for that, and I hope you have a great week teaching. I'll catch you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.